to be having an amazing guest today, which is Andrea Tarr. She's the founder of Veterinary Prescriber. It's a very, very important resource to us as veterinary professionals. I'm going to pass over to her so she can explain a little bit more.
Hi, hello everybody, and thanks for inviting me, Esme. It's really nice to be here. My name's Andrea Tarr. I'm a pharmacist. I started out as a human pharmacist. I started working in the NHS in hospital, but very quickly I specialised in medicines information. And what that is a specialty which involves searching for evidence and evaluating it, and then presenting it in a way in which it can be used to make decisions about medical treatments. From there, I worked for a bit in the pharmaceutical industry, both in medicines information and a little bit in sales as well. For most of my career, I worked for an organisation that produced, it was an independent organisation that produced prescribing information for doctors. So my skills are all about searching for evidence, evaluating it, integrating it with clinical information and practical information and regulatory information on medicines, and presenting it in a way that prescribers can use it to make decisions about treatments for patients. So I got the idea for starting Veterinary Prescriber while I was working for that organisation, because we got a letter from a vet whose wife was a doctor who was used to seeing the information that we were producing, and said, well, why don't you produce something like this for vets? We could really do with good quality evidence-based information. And the organisation didn't do anything about it. And then there were a couple of other things that happened that sort of prompted me to think of starting this resource. One of those was that I used to have a very part-time job in a community pharmacy, just to keep my hand in pharmacy practice. And that pharmacy was quite close to a veterinary hospital. So I was used to seeing veterinary prescriptions, and therefore in the position of having to find information myself about veterinary medicines. And, I was kind of disappointed in what there was really. Doctors very well served with excellent information on medicines, but really there wasn't the same kind of quality amount of information on veterinary medicines. So I decided to start Veterinary Prescriber as a resource for vets, because I knew how to produce independent information on medicines, and I knew I'm not a vet, so I knew I'd need to work with vets to produce that information. And we've been doing that for about 8 years now. What we do is publish a monthly CPD module. We cover all sorts of topics, not just osteoarthritis drugs, but anything to do with medicines, or kinds of medicines, or just general topics about medicines as well.
Brilliant. It's such a lovely resource to have, and to have somebody, we were just talking before we started the live about how little time vets have, and there are so many medicines out there, and to understand truly what the evidence is, a lot of time. So to have somebody who is who understands how to think critically and present that to us in a way that we can interpret and understand easily when we've got not a lot of time is brilliant. So what Andrea and her team are doing is fantastic for the vet community. So one of the topics we were going to talk about, and to start with, was the plethora of drugs that are out there, from sort of plant-based things to more synthetic medicines. Do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting to think about, where modern medicines have come from, because really a lot has happened in relatively short time. I mean, people have used medicines for thousands of years, and, originally they would have been medicines derived from plants, plant extracts, or even animal extracts. And I've used one example which is kind of relevant to CAM. There was which is extract of willow bark, which was used by the Egyptians. I mean, it was recognized, 3,000 years ago that it had pain relieving and anti-inflammatory properties. But it wasn't until like the 1800s that somebody was able to extract the active ingredient, the chemical that's actually having that effect. And then after that, somebody else was, they were able to synthesize it and actually even modify it to create something that was, the chemical is something called salicylic acid, but that's quite an irritant compound. And so somebody was able to modify it and produce something that was less irritant, and that was something called acetyl salicylic acid, which became known as aspirin. So by the 1950s, that was the most popular pain-relieving medicine. So really, it's when that all started, and the ability to extract chemicals and identify them, and then since about the Second World War, we've been able to there've been enormous developments in pharmaceutical medicine, being able to identify how things work. And it wasn't until about the 1970s that somebody found out, exactly what aspirin was doing in the body, how it was reducing pain and having a pain relieving effect. That's when it was discovered that it interacted with the enzyme that is involved in producing the inflammatory prostaglandins. So with those set of discoveries, pharmaceutical chemists were able to synthesize, many more chemicals. That led to the discovery of all the different non-steroidals and so on, and all the the different drugs that we have. But also, along with that came the realization that if something's doing something in your body, it's having an effect that you want, then it's very likely as well that in some people it's going to have an unwanted effect as well, an adverse effect. And really, it was that realization that, as well as benefits, the medicines can cause harm, that led to medicines regulation. And medicines regulation really kind of came about in the late 1960s. And what sort of prompted it in the UK was sort of a tragedy involving human medicine called thalidomide, the thalidomide tragedy. And if people don't know about that, it was there was a drug that was marketed as a drug that prevented nausea. It was marketed for use by pregnant women. Unfortunately, it wasn't realised until sort of a few years later that it was causing birth defects, and so that led to legislation in the form of the Medicines Act in 1968. So that's sort of relatively recently, really, in the history of medicine. And well, regulation has evolved since then, and veterinary medicines regulation has grown out of that as well. So in this country, medicines are very highly regulated, and on the going down the veterinary medicine route. So veterinary medicine regulation was kind of tied up with human medicines regulations for a while until 2005. When specific medicines regulation was created, called the Veterinary Medicines Regulations. And an important part of that is to define what a veterinary medicine is. It's a very specific definition. So veterinary medicine is any product which is either medicinal by function or by prescription. So I can give some examples of that. What that means is that so, for example, grapiprant is known to have an effect, or one of the non-steroidals that we use, meloxicam, for example, that's known to have a pharmacological effect. So if somebody was to wanted to sell such a product, even if they didn't make any medicinal claims, because it's known to have a pharmacological effect, that by definition is a veterinary medicine. On the other hand, if something kind of any other product containing kind of anything, I don't know, think of an example, anything that's, well, a supplement, for example, if it's sold as, and it's described as having medicinal property, for example, if the packaging or an advert or somebody says this will treat your dog's arthritis, it will reduce inflammation in your dog, that's a medicinal claim. So regardless of what's in it, that means it comes under the definition of a veterinary medicine.
Yes.
And so if something is a veterinary medicine, if something comes under that definition, by law, you can only market it if you have a marketing authorization from a medicines regulator. So in the UK, that's the Veterinary Medicines Directorate, or some medicines are at the moment authorised by the European Medicines Agency. So there's a very clear distinction between what is a medicine and what isn't a medicine.
So we're talking really about what is like an authorised product, so such as meloxicam, versus an unauthorised product, so, which could be any of the supplements really, I suppose, the prescription. Yeah.
And another example is CBD. I mean, that's quite an interesting one because there's a lot of interest in that. And in fact, in a couple of years ago now, 2018, I think, the Veterinary Medicines Directorate decided to issue a statement to say that they considered that CBD, any products containing CBD, come under the definition of a veterinary medicine because it fulfills the part of the definition about it having being medicinal by function. So because of that, that's why there aren't any authorized medicines for animals containing CBD at the moment until somebody applies for a marketing authorization.
Yeah, I think that's probably, I can imagine, going on in the background because it's a hot topic at the moment, isn't it, CBD? So how are, we've covered it a little bit, but how are medicines authorized? Or how do we decide what is a medicine?
Right. Well, if a company wants to market a medicine, they have to put together an enormous amount of information and present it to the medicines regulator, usually the Veterinary Medicines Directorate, who evaluate it. And what the Veterinary Medicines Directorate are looking at there are three criteria: there's quality, efficacy, and safety. And companies have to go to enormous lengths, produce a huge amount of evidence. First of all, to show the quality of the medicine. So if it's an authorized medicine, you can be sure that what is said to be in it is in it. So they have to do studies to they have to provide evidence to show that the product contains exactly, within a very small margin of error, the amount of product that's in that they say is in it, that there are no contaminants, and what the VMD does, it looks at the evidence. It also goes to the factories and inspects them as well. And people have the companies have to have very high standards of production.
Yeah.
So there's the quality aspect. There's efficacy. They have to prove. So if a company wants to market it for a particular use, they have to provide evidence in the form of clinical trials to show that the drug actually does what they want to market it for. So if it's for osteoarthritis, they have to show that it's effective in helping specific, whatever symptoms that the claim is concerned with. And then they have to show safety. So there are all aspects of safety. Safety covers safety to the animal that's being treated, safety to the person who's handling the product, and also safety to the environment as well. So look at all those three things. But with safety, that's a kind of, when we talk about adverse effects, the trials that are done to, companies have to do trials to establish the effective dose of the product. And then they have to do sort of larger trials involving animals that are, the typical of the animals that would be treated, which are much larger. But also, although those trials are large enough usually to demonstrate that the product is effective, and they'll show up the most common adverse effects, but for the rarer adverse effects, for example, the ones that only turn up in 1 in 10,000 animals and so on, the clinical trials aren't really going to pick those up. So that's why another important aspect of medicines regulation is pharmacovigilance, what's called pharmacovigilance, which is the ongoing process of monitoring for adverse effects, while the product is on the market, and that's really important for picking up adverse effects when the drugs are being used in much larger numbers of animals.
Yeah, because I know as a vet myself, there's been times where I've heard of these amazing drugs and we've used them for a couple of years, and then we've thought there's not really been any side effects, but then you hear of the very rare ones, and that then that has to be taken into account with the cases you're seeing. But I think that is an important point, because when you're looking at the new drugs, we've only got that long that it's been used for as evidence for how safe it is, and in general that's good, because as long as you've had it. So for grapipram, for example, we've used it, I think, for about 2 years in the UK, and so far so good. But there are going to be probably eventually side effects. Well, I don't know, but we assume so with most drugs there are. So it'll be interesting over the next few years to see if those develop, and then they will change the guidance with those, and that'll be included in the data sheets and all that.
Exactly, yeah, that's right. Because all that information that's gathered during the regulatory process is summarised in a document called the Summary of Product Characteristics, or what's sometimes known as the data sheet. And that's a sort of a, that's not a static document. It's updated as more becomes known about the product. So for a product that's an authorised medicine, it's that's not the end of the story when it's on the market. It's always being monitored, and we're learning more and more about medicines all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you started to talk about it a bit, but we've got a little graphic here about evidence-based medicine. I'm going to pop that up if you don't mind explaining about it. I'm going to just disappear for a second.
Yeah, okay, so this is the sort of what's sometimes called the pyramid, the evidence pyramid, and it just shows that, and it goes from bottom to top in order of increasing. Oh, that's my phone. Oops, sorry about that. Hello, turn that off. Oops. Knew something would happen. So the pyramid goes from bottom to top, increasing level of reliability of evidence. So right at the bottom is anecdote and opinion, and that's the least reliable form of evidence. And that's because it's very prone to bias, because with most medicines, it's actually very difficult to sort of see, if you're just observing something in an animal, to see whether something is having an effect, unless it's something like an anesthetic. Obviously, that's a very sort of dramatic effect. But for most medicines, they do a bit, and so just an observation is very prone to bias, because there can be many other things going on at the same time. An animal can be on different medicines, or there might be other interventions like weight loss or lifestyle intervention. There might be some other disease process going on. And also, one person's opinion and observation isn't, it's just one person. It doesn't tell you about, there may be many, many more people who've seen something quite the opposite that you're not hearing about. So anecdote and opinion is considered the least reliable form of evidence. And then going up from there, just sort of lumped in.
And I think just from a clinician's point of view, I think we get quite emotionally involved in our cases, and it is hard to take the bias out of what you're seeing, because you want that pet to do better. So just because I put a dog on something and it's got better doesn't necessarily mean that I can prove that it was that drug that I chose. So I think it's important when owners are hearing their friends say that their dog got so much better on a certain supplement or a certain drug, as you said, to take into account that you're hugely biased because of your emotional input, and also there are other things going on. I just wanted to tell a story, but my friend had another friend who does oils and things, aromatherapy type stuff, and she was telling a story about her daughter getting loads better from a really serious illness using these oils. But what she didn't tell was the part where the daughter was also in hospital being looked after by medical staff. So you only see a bit of that picture. So I think it's really important when you're listening to other people's opinions, that you can take them on board, but then use that to then go and find out more information.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll let you carry on.
All right. No, I mean you're right, and it is really powerful anecdote and opinion. I mean I've succumbed to it as well. I mean I've got a story to tell. I've got a dog, and he has behavioural problem. He's a reactive dog, and I went to a pet store and met a really lovely lady there, who she was very sympathetic to, and very kind towards my dog, and we was really understanding about his reactivity problem and so on. And we were talking about nutrition, all sorts of things, and I really trusted her. And anyway, she's recommended that I use valerian extract to help with his anxiety when we went out walking. And although in my head I was thinking, well, I had no idea if this is going to work and so on, but I really trusted her because I liked her and she'd been kind, and I trusted her opinion about other things, and I bought it, and I did try it once or twice, but I've no idea if it worked, and I've been able to tell actually. But anyway, it is very powerful, but that's the lowest form of the least reliable form of evidence. And above there, I've sort of lumped together some other types of studies which are generally considered to be, weakish sort of evidence, but they can be useful for finding out certain things. And further up is the abbreviation RCT, which stands for Randomized Controlled Trial, and that is generally considered the best way of finding out if a treatment works. So we can talk a bit more in more detail about that in a minute. But above there, I've just written meta-analysis, and that's just to say that, I mean, if there are lots of randomized controlled trials, and there generally aren't in veterinary medicine, but in human medicine, there are quite a lot, and you can get an even better, more reliable information from finding all the randomized controlled trials on the particular thing that you're interested in. And then there's a sort of statistical method of combining the results from all the trials into what's called a meta-analysis, and that gives an even more accurate estimate of the treatment effect. So that's the sort of very top. But randomized controlled trial is the sort of what's called the gold standard for finding out if a treatment works. So we can talk. I mean, the reason why a randomized controlled trial is the most reliable form is because it's the one that kind of rules out any form of bias as much as possible. I mean, there can be problems with randomized controlled trials. It's possible to do bad randomized controlled trials, and they can have bias in them and so on, but they're the best thing we've got. And that's why when you're looking at a randomized controlled trial, you want to find out what maybe are the possible sources of bias. And what it's telling you really is how reliable is this result. I mean, that's what we're always thinking about when we're looking at evidence. How much can I rely on, how much can I rely on this evidence?
Yes. And it's the confidence you can have, isn't it? We use in stats, we talk about confidence intervals, but it's the confidence in the evidence you're being presented, so how true it really is. And it's important to know that, and how I think we'll go into that in more detail, how we can work that out from specific drugs, but there are some uncertainties, aren't there, in terms
there are uncertainties about everything to do with medicine, really, and it's all about using medicine. It's all about that. This is what the regulatory authorities do. This is what vets do. This is what doctors do. It's all about balancing the likelihood of benefit with the likelihood of harm, and it's that balance. So a regulatory authority will only authorize a medicine if it can see that the likelihood of benefit outweighs any kind of risk of any harm from adverse effects. And that's what prescribers are doing.
So should we go back to we'll just think about an authorized product and maybe talk about what evidence we have behind it, just so we can give an example. Do you know about CBD oil, maybe?
Okay, well, that's, I mean, we reviewed CBD a couple of years ago now, and so I haven't looked to see what evidence there is recently But CBD, I mean, we had a look, there are different aspects that we need to consider with CBD. There's the sort of regulatory part of it, the legal aspect of that. But also, there's the evidence. And well, when we looked at the time, there's very little published evidence. I think what we found was that there was one randomized controlled trial, but it was a very small trial in about 20 odd dogs, and it used, from my recollection, the subjective measures of how it was working. So really, it was a fairly small amount of weak evidence.
Yeah.
When you compare that, for example, with Grapiprant, which is an authorized medicine, and we reviewed that around about the same time, and looking at the evidence that was presented to the regulatory authority, they'd have done various trials working up to find out the dose and so on. But there was one main trial looking at the efficacy of that, and that was in like 230 odd dogs. So the reliability of the result of that is going to be much greater than a very small trial.
So what we can tell from that is it's not that CBD oil does or doesn't work. It's just that we haven't actually got enough evidence.
No, exactly. Yeah. So lack of evidence isn't evidence of a lack of effect. I mean, it's a lack of evidence. We can't be sure. That's the thing. Yeah. And I think it would be a shame if CBD became kind of widely used without, taking advantage of the opportunity to find out about it. I mean, it's really good to see now what's happening with the coronavirus pandemic and what's happening in the National Health Service. Because people started to talk about different medicines that might help in treating coronavirus, like we heard people talk about hydroxychloroquine and various antiviral drugs, and those are being used in the NHS now, but they're being used in formal randomized controlled trials. So it means we will learn, what works and what doesn't work, and that's so valuable. It would have been awful just to use them and not find out.
Yeah.
And the same could happen because I think, CBD, we don't know. I mean, it's a really interesting drug. It would be very, it's very promising. I don't know. It would be very interesting if it is effective, but really there's too little evidence to know at the moment.
Yeah, I think that the takeaway point from that really is that when we don't know, you're safer and it's better for your pet to use a drug that we do know. So it doesn't mean that CBD oil is never going to be a good drug to use. We don't have the evidence yet, and hopefully we'll get more evidence so we can say either way. But when there are drugs out there that we know are going to work, then the best thing for your pet is to use the one we know reliably is going to be safe. It's going to be, we call it efficacy, but how well it works for the pet as well. So I think that's kind of the important thing to understand about this, rather than taking, again, going back to that, the biased evidence when we give an anecdote. It may be true. It may be that it's helping that one specific pet, but if we don't have a full trial there, we don't know what the potential side effects, what the potential negative effects are.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, because it's not good to assume that it's just doing good things, because we know, there are plenty of examples in human medicine where things have been done assuming that they're good things, medicine and non-medicine, and then when clinical trials have been done, it's been discovered actually they were doing more harm than good. So it is really important to properly evaluate things.
Absolutely. So how can we as vet professionals or owners, how can we find out if a product is an authorised medicine?
Well, in the UK, the Veterinary Medicines Directorate keeps a list of, has a database called the Product Information Database, and every authorised medicine is in that database. So you can go in there and look.
I think I've got the website here. I'll just sneak away just for a second so you can see it a bit closer. So we'll put the link on for this afterwards, but this is the website where you can check.
That's it. So you can go, it's on the Veterinary Medicines Veterinary Medicine Directorate's website, and it's a database. So you can just go in there and you can write in the brand name if you're looking for a particular brand, and you can then it'll if it's there, it'll come up, and you'll also be able to download the summary of product characteristics, which I refer to, which is the sort of document containing all the prescribing information. One thing to say about the Veterinary Medicines Directorate is that all authorised medicines are in there, but not all the medicines that are in there are actually marketed. So, sometimes companies gain a marketing authorization, but they don't actually decide to market it here, or they, maybe they never do, or maybe they're waiting for a while. But if it is an authorized medicine, it will definitely be in there.
If you don't mind me going on a slight tangent, I just noticed a question from Jodie, who asked what the mechanism for reporting adverse events is and how often it's done. Just to continue kind of from what you were saying.
Yeah, well, it's the Veterinary Medicines Directorate again who collects spontaneous reports about suspected adverse effects, and you can go onto their website. If you just put in VMD adverse effect, then you should get directly to the page. And it's important to know that anybody can report an adverse effect. I mean, a vet, any veterinary professional, or a pet owner can report an adverse effect. And you can either report it directly to the manufacturer or directly to the VMD. And anything that goes to the manufacturer goes to the VMD as well. And what the VMD does, it collects all the effects. It'll, if you're reporting something, there's a form that you can fill in, providing as much information as possible. And the VMD regularly evaluates those. And what they're looking for, they do two things. They do like regular reviews with the manufacturers, but they're keeping an eye looking for signals. So, particularly with new medicines, when, as you say, there might be the rare adverse effects that haven't come up in the pre-marketing trials, they'll be looking for, signals. So if there are quite a few reports here of, whatever, and so they'll keep an eye on things. And when it is quite a difficult thing, because like with efficacy, it's often very difficult to prove that an adverse effect has been caused by a particular drug, because again, there are various other things going on at the same time. An animal could be on another medicine, or it could be just the disease process that's going on, or just a coincidence, or just something that happens by chance that happened to happen when the medicine's being used. So they have to make a judgment, based on the, how many reports there are and so on, and the seriousness of the report, and, various factors. And if it's judged that in all likelihood the adverse effect is due to the medicine, then that information is added to the summary of product characteristics, so that prescribers, vets can know about it and take that into consideration. Yeah. Sometimes there'll be effects. For example, I can think of a drug where there were rare reports of seizures. So then they just decided to add to the information that the drug should be avoided in dogs with a history of epilepsy, for example. So it's trying to make sure that animals that are more likely to have an adverse effect, that the drugs may be avoided in those. But it's always a balance of, the effect that you want, and, and keeping an eye on adverse effects. And most adverse effects are fairly, the serious effects are usually very rare. But all medicines have adverse effects.
Yeah. Absolutely, thank you for answering that. So I think really that kind of leads us kind of onto how do we decipher if the claims a product is making are true? Because a lot of them have what we refer to as reference marketing. So basically they'll say, this is an amazing new supplement, it will treat all the pain, you won't need to use any drugs, and it will fix the dog's joint. So how do we prove that's true claim or not?
Well, if it's an authorized medicine, I mean, it would be illegal to say something that's untrue, that that hasn't been proven and isn't part of the terms of the marketing authorization. So I assume we're talking about unauthorized medicines in general. That's what I mean, it's very difficult, but I mean, I would say that what you need is a healthy dose of skepticism, and if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And I don't know, I mean, the thing is that things that don't have a marketing authorization, they're not allowed to make medical claims, and so that's why they will often make very kind of woolly claims about things. Like products like that will say that things can be used to support joint health, or that kind of phrase, which doesn't really kind of mean a lot. I mean, it's kind of difficult. But when you say reference marketing, they have
just they might say that they'll say, oh, Cambridge scientists approve this product. Then there's no sort of actual reference there, so there's no.
Well, that's very telling, I think, for a start. And I mean, it kind of sounds impressive. You might be impressed by it, but does it mean anything? It doesn't really mean anything. And yeah, it's kind of just being skeptical, I think.
We've got a little slide on this again, but I think you've given me a place we can report them, because, as you say, it is actually illegal to make a claim. So if a product is saying it's going to fix something which it clearly hasn't got the evidence, there is somewhere we can report that. So I'll pop that slide up now, and let me just get rid of my camera. My computer's not playing ball. Just 1 second. Oh, won't let me. We'll put it on at the end if that's okay, because my computer won't.
So again, this is the Veterinary Medicines Directorate, because I mean, one of their roles is to enforce the law, and so there's a place where you can report products that are not authorized medicines, but that are making medicinal claims. So there's a sort of place in their website where people can report those, and but I think they can only do something about it if the product, or whoever's making the claim, is in the UK. I think things that come from outside the UK are maybe things they can't deal with.
Yeah. I suppose one of the things is that if it's an open company who has got evidence, if you ask for a copy of their studies, most of them are going to be very, very happy for you to have them. So that's another way. And most companies are very open when you ask them for their evidence. They should be quite upfront about that, because they're kind of proud of their evidence that they've got for their product.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that because something isn't an authorized medicine, it doesn't mean that there won't be good evidence. It may be that they didn't want to apply for marketing authorization. It's a big, expensive process to go through, and so on. So my battery's running low now.
Okay.
So I didn't foresee that problem. Would you mind if I just get my plug?
No, you carry on. That's fine. I'll have a little look through who's here while we're waiting for Andrea. Norman, Rosemary and Hannah, Jodie, who we answered your question, Danielle and Joey, Maggie. Yeah, you're right about the yellow form. That's what Andrew was talking about. Claire says, has anybody noted hair loss with Galliprant? As far as I know, that isn't a known side effect. That's something I'd speak to your vet about. Could be loads of reasons why you're seeing that. Here she is. She's back again.
Oh yeah, sorry. You can tell I've never done this before, can't you?
Because I caught you talking too long beforehand. That's all right. So we've kind of gone through where to report things if you aren't happy, how to sort of distinguish between an authorized and an unauthorized product. I think really we need to talk about veterinary prescriber. So I will put up your website address, which I think is a really valuable place for vet professionals to go to. I will just pop that up in the slide next to us. So it's somewhere that's great for CPD. Do you want to have a talk through that?
Yes. Well, we've got two websites. There's Veterinary Prescriber, which is really aimed at vets, and we publish a monthly CPD module. There's a quiz at the end. You can get a CPD certificate, and there's a sister website which is aimed at other veterinary professionals, vet nurses and SQPs. That maybe focuses a bit more on over-the-counter medicines, but also is more presented from the point of view of people maybe supplying medicines rather than prescribing them. And with both of them, they're subscription products because we're an independent company, which means that we don't take any advertising or sponsorship. And that's really an important principle because that enables us to be critical and unbiased. So it's a monthly subscription. You can sign up and you can cancel any time. And so there's a monthly module on each, and the library of modules, and we deal with all kinds of medicines, all kinds of things to do with medicines, veterinary medicines, and not only authorized medicines, unauthorized medicines as well. And also we produce medicines news, so we kind of have a roundup of new products and so on, and any regulatory changes and that kind of thing.
So it's great. I had a good route around the website and it's brilliant. So I've got the next probably 48 hours of my life planned in. It's all brilliant. Loads of that. And I think you've got some large animal bits on there as well as small animal.
Yeah, a little bit, just a little bit on horses, really. But it's mainly companion animal.
Yeah, brilliant. It's amazing. We've got another question here, Andrea, if you don't mind me popping that up, if you don't mind. So Chris said, if a pharmaceutical company is not behind the testing, who is going to do it? Therefore, would it not be valuable to have a controlled anecdotal information being logged? That is in the absence of any organisation taking it on.
Well, I mean, that is a problem that, it is difficult because it does cost money to produce the evidence and to market a product. And in some ways that kind of can sort of bias evidence towards the kind of products that behind which there's a lot of money. I mean, so for example, there'll be a lot of money going into pharmaceuticals and not so much money going into maybe simple forms of things. I think in terms of human medicine, a huge amount of money spent on discovering and marketing non-steroidals, but nobody does clinical trials to find out how valuable a walking stick is, for example. So it's a kind of a difficult problem, but I don't know. Having a database of anecdotal evidence, and I'm not really sure. There are ways of.
We do have some non-drugs company studies because vets who are specialising have to do huge amount of research projects. And so there are often things that have no drug bias. So I know there's been studies with paracetamol and tramadol that aren't to do with the drug company and various things like that. So there are things out there. What I would say is, I guess what would always make me question how well it works is why they're not interested, no drug companies interested in selling that product, because maybe there's not, so I think if it's a product that looks like it's really going to work, they're going to want to make money. So they will want to test it. So that would make me question why no drug company has already taken this particular product on and tried to make a study to sell it if there's already. I don't know what you think about that.
No, I agree with you. I mean,
Lynn's that same point as well. Lynn's just said if a product, chemical compound was really good, presumably pharma would be interested in exploiting it. So that's always. I think it's for that kind of treatment. I mean, earlier when I was talking about the sort of lifestyle things which people can do cheaply, and there isn't any nobody can make money out of them really. So
there's that kind of thing where studies might not be done because there isn't any money to be made out of it. But you're right, for a sort of a product, a substance or a supplement or something, yes, yeah, why wouldn't, if there's a lot of, it's a big market. Why don't people do trials?
I just want to say hi to Leslie, who says it's her first time watching live, so I hope you've enjoyed it. We have had an amazing talk today, Andrea. I thought we'd just quickly, if it's okay, would you mind summarising some key points about what you've talked about in terms of how to briefly advise someone how to understand all the products there are on the veterinary market?
Okay, right. I did think about this beforehand. I thought, well, have a healthy dose of skepticism when you're reading claims. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. All decisions about medicines are about making a decision about the balance, about the benefit versus the harm. Anecdote is the least reliable form of evidence. And my final one is, don't be afraid to ask your vet questions.
And if we don't know, we'll find out. We're all geeks in the vet world, so we like to know why things work and how they work. So luckily we've got people like Andrea who have their amazing resources like Veterinary Prescriber that we can refer to when we don't know the answer to questions. Thank you very much for your time, Andrea.
Thank you very much. Thank you.